What does the public misunderstand about our justice system?
I suppose it depends, Ted, what you mean about our justice system. I think you mean our criminal justice system, which is completely different from all other parts of our justice system. And I think what they don't understand about it is that the criminal courts are really not there for the defendants, not there for the victims or the witnesses. The whole point of the criminal law is to protect everyone, the public. So our criminal laws are enacted by and large by parliaments which we have voted for. One party to a criminal trial, the prosecution, wasn't there when the events happened, wasn't there when the knife went in, wasn't there when the fraud was perpetrated, essentially is there in the name of the Crown to represent the public. The big decision in a criminal court isn't made by the judge like it is in a civil court. It's made by you, or people like you, your friends and family, who care enough about the system to put their names on the electoral register and thereby, and probably inadvertently, make themselves eligible for jury service. So the whole thing is about the community in which we live, protecting us, giving us a way of life that allows us to live peacefully, free from fear, for ourselves and for our property.
That's quite a beautiful philosophy, but when you think about sort of serving on a jury as one of the last great civic duties, why do you see so many... I mean, I'm sure you would have dealt with this an awful lot as a judge. Why is it sort of something to be avoided or something that you can try and wriggle out of? Where does that sort of stigma of trying to hide away from it come from?
So it is true that when people turn up for jury service, some are desperate to do it and some are so not. But when you're dealing with a really serious case, so I've been dealing for many years with murder or things with a dead body in or a nearly dead body in. And once jurors get involved, once they hear the opening, once they look into the eyes of the defendant or the bereaved family, once they start to see a witness struggling to give evidence, they are totally engaged. And my experience with juries and jurors, certainly at that level, is they work so hard. And I've had many who've tried to get out of it, and I've said, take your seat. Just take your seat in the jury box. Let's see how we get on. And they are totally committed once we get into the trial.
With being being part of the jury, it seems such a massive responsibility, because this person, you're going to decide whether, especially in the Old Bailey, whether crimes are either 30 years or nothing, guilty, not guilty. Are there certain responsibilities that the jury must have, or certain kind of positions? So whether that's being able to think freely, whether that's being able to change their mind about things, what makes a good jury?
Well, it isn't the jurors that make it work. Okay. It's the totality of the jurors creating a jury. A jury is like a 12-headed beast. It's one creature. It's not 12 separate creatures. But what makes it so good, what makes a juror's verdict better than a judge's verdict, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, is that you get 12 people's life experiences. And I don't know what it's like in a small county town where you may get jurors who are all, of a similar type. But at the Old Bailey, we get such mixed juries. They are, in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious background, educational background, economic background, total mixture. And it is very often someone who you wouldn't think of as a leader of men, who can throw in an idea that throws light on whether a witness should be believed or not believed, because it's having the mixture of people, some of whom will come from backgrounds a bit like the witnesses, the defendants, and will be able to explain some of their demeanour and attitudes. So I think it's really the totality that's important, but it is so important to have a real mixture there. And then the other thing, which is vital, is that they are true to their oath. Now, their oath is very, very simple. The oath or affirmation, same thing. It is the undertaking to bring in a true verdict in accordance with the evidence. But it's more than that. It's the proper application of the evidence as they find the facts to be, to the law as the judge gives them the law. And so there's this interweaving of the judge's role at the end of the trial when he or she summing up the case for the jury, that allows the jury to properly do their job.
Has that become more difficult recently? Let's take perhaps the Lucy Letby trial, where it was something of a trial by social media before the evidence was adduced in court, and is it more difficult now for a juror to make dispassionate decisions based upon the evidence rather than upon the sort of broader cultural conversation?
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you? You would think so, but judges, when they are dealing with juries, when they first come into court, they give them certain ground rules. And amongst those ground rules will be something like, please don't read about this case on social media or anywhere else. Doesn't mean you can't use your emails, doesn't mean you can't look at the television. But the reality is, we all know that things get put online or in newspapers or are broadcast that turn out to be plain wrong. And if you act upon something you've heard, which the barristers haven't had a chance to deal with, to explain to you, that way lies potential injustice, which is not what our courtrooms are about. And I think that jurors are in such a privileged position, and they know it. Even physically, where they sit in the courtroom opposite the witness box, not by accident, but because it allows them not just to hear what a witness is saying, but to see their demeanour, their expression, their body language. They can watch the defendant's reaction as the evidence is given. They will hear it tested in detail in a way that never appears on clips on the news. And their judgment is the only thing that matters. Judge will tell them that at the beginning, will remind them of it if there is heavy press coverage or heavy coverage online. So I do think there's extra pressures. I do think it needs careful handling by a judge in some cases, but I don't think I have seen a case in which it's ever stopped a jury doing their job.
You just mentioned that jurors get privileged access to the witness. And also, you mentioned in your book that people who are prettier, more beautiful, tend to be trusted more. So what I'm getting at is, how can an objective decision of the law, whether this person is guilty or not, come through subjective means? Because people are subjective in how they decide things. So from what point does it go from someone's opinion to legal fact?
So legal fact is quite an interesting expression. Your question, if you'd asked it of me 65 years ago, would have been quite difficult to answer because eyewitness evidence was very often the only evidence then. If you think about it these days, that is just not the case. So eyewitnesses are very good, but they are very fallible. You've only got to sit in a trial at the Old Bailey and hear 6 witnesses all describing a bust up in the street, and they'll describe different numbers of people, different sets of people, different directions they're running in, different things that are being done. None of them are lying, but they are not reliable. They can only tell you what they saw and what their brains actually registered and retained. And we now know that is quite fallible. And with witnesses who have to wait a long time to give evidence, particularly about traumatic events, that also is very subject to memories fragmenting and deteriorating, which is why when you get sexual offences, particularly against children, and you make them wait to give their evidence, you can get very distorted accounts, not because the children are lying, but because, for example, they've had nightmares about it, and what you remember is the last thing you remembered. So everything becomes distorted. And so any tendency, really born of, I think, of television and films and things, to imagine that the good-looking guy or woman is the hero or heroine, is exaggerated when it comes to that sort of evidence. But these days, it is so unlikely that that will be the only evidence, particularly in murders. If you look at a murder, there'll be, unless it is a purely domestic murder, there'll be CCTV evidence, there's always cell site evidence and telephone evidence, there'll be maybe blood spatter, there may be evidence of the way in which cars were driven or where they were driven, ANPR evidence, there may be 100 different sorts of very technical evidence. And the judge sums up the case at the end. And it isn't until a judge does that that you actually see the whole picture. Because the prosecution's never going to tell the jury the whole picture. They want to concentrate on the prosecution stuff. Ditto the defense stuff. But when the judge filters the whole thing together, starts at 9 a.m., tells you what could be seen on CCTV at 9:01, tells you where the victim was at 9:02 and what the blood splatter was around that place at 9:02, takes the whole story through, interweaving all the scientific evidence, the forensic, what we call forensic. It's forensic, meaning belonging to the courtroom, and scientific because of its nature. When you take that together with the eyewitness evidence, the jury have so many facts to work with that I think there is more than ample opportunity to make sure they can focus on putting together a true picture of what really happened.
That's very interesting prophylactic to the adversarial system. I was going to ask you about that later, but just the idea of the judge being able to sort of draw the facts from the both sides and put together a bigger picture of the truth, that almost makes the one focus on one side, one focus on the other side. That's almost quite a nice remedy to that. I'd just like to take you back to what you spoke about with the human fallibility and perhaps witnesses' stories changing over time. We now have things like the ABE interviews and other sort of developments which make collecting evidence and all of this a lot easier. Over your career at the bar and as a judge, which are some of the things that you're proudest that we've sort of like instantiated?
I know there's a lot of criticism of pre-recorded evidence. But it doesn't matter what you do, someone's going to criticise it. I'm very proud of the whole ABE system, and we ought just to explain what that is. ABE stands for Achieving Best Evidence, and it came into force in the very late 1990s, when vulnerable witnesses, most commonly in sex cases, most commonly where children are involved, but not necessarily or only that, when they first make their complaint to police, instead of a written statement being taken down by a police officer at a witness's dictation, like me saying, well, Constable, I parked my car outside the house at 10:42 in the evening, and when I came down at 10:42 next morning, it had disappeared. You don't get anything like that in those cases. The child, let's talk about it as a child, is taken into a suite which is set up with audio and visual recording equipment, and the interviewing officer will be specially trained in order to elicit from the child in a non-leading way the information. So the child will begin by giving a free account, and even in a convoluted story, the child may take only 2 minutes over that. The child won't understand what the really important features are that would be important for conviction. And so the child will give a free account, such as it is, and then the interviewing officer will ask non-leading questions to draw out every last shred of information that the child's got. At the end of that, the recording is sealed. That is the child's evidence in chief, and it will be played to the jury even if the trial takes place a year later or whatever it is. The same act that created that also made provision for pre-recorded cross-examination. Now, obviously that can't happen quite as soon, because a defendant has to be arrested, given a chance to instruct lawyers, the evidence has to be served on them, he or she has to have a chance to prepare their case. But it can be done long before the trial. We didn't do it. For reasons I've never understood, we held back, we said it's too dangerous, we said it's too complicated, the child should go before the jury, either in the courtroom or on a video link to be cross-examined live. But for a while now, we have been pre-recording cross-examination. The same things that were complained about back in the early 2000s with the ABE aspect, the evidence in chief, are now complained about with the cross-examination. And most obviously, it's because when the jury are looking at a child's face blown up on a screen, every flicker of the eyes, every tremor of the lips, every looking away is apt to be over-interpreted. Again, because we're so used to doing that with the television. Yes. But I still think it is extremely valuable and a tool that we would be very unfortunate to lose.
Why do you think the court system is so resistant to change like that? You said people were
Everything's resistant to change. Everybody is resistant to change. I mean, I'll give you an example.
Yes, please.
When I started at the bar, we used to have stenographers in every courtroom. We still had them when I became a judge back in 2000 and very late 2007. Shortly after that, they were replaced. We didn't have the lovely ladies and gentlemen who had their, typing away in the courtroom, and where you could lean down and say, Peter, could you just tell me what it was the witness said 2 minutes ago?
That made for cracking telly, didn't it?
It was fantastic stuff. And it was replaced by recording equipment, which was supposed to pick up everything across the courtroom, Well, we all said this is ridiculous. It'll never work. It won't pick up the subtleties of sound. Things will be missed. There'll be misrecording. There'll be all sorts of problems. Well, there are some problems, but my gosh, we were wrong. It is such a clever system.
Do you have any ideas of the next steps then? The next sort of changes that might come into force?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what's likely to come into force, and by the time anyone watches this, may have come into force. There is a real risk that we will lose jury trials, the right to elect jury trial for great tranches of people who now have that right.
And what would the conditions of the charge be to prevent them from being able to elect a jury trial?
The fact that it's electable. At the moment, there are three sorts of trials. Everything starts in the magistrate's court. Things which are summary only stay there. Things which are indictable only have to go to the Crown Court. There's this huge tranche of cases in the middle, which are not as serious as the very serious ones, but much more serious than,
Parking fine or something like that.
Yes, exactly. And there is a proposition, there is likely to be a proposition, the government are in favour of it, that the right to elect jury trial on many of those cases will disappear. And the tribunal, instead of being a judge and jury, will be a judge and two lay magistrates. That is the likely proposition. If it were being proposed because people genuinely thought it was a fairer system of justice, I might say, well, I don't think I agree, but, if there are arguments that says it's a fairer system of justice, well and good. But that's not the position. The position is that the subject has only been explored in this way, and the proposition arrived at, if it is arrived at, because we have this massive backlog of cases, and no one seems to be able to think of a way of dealing with it other than this. Whether it is true that it will remove the backlog, and whether the price for our justice system is worth paying is another matter altogether. But it's a very, very big step. I'm not saying that the jury system is perfect. It's expensive, it's slow, it's cumbersome. But I think almost everyone who works within the system would say, show me a better one.
Could you just spell the dangers of going down that path out a little bit more for our audience?
Well, the dangers are reflected in the conversation we had earlier about the value of a jury, the value of the bringing together 12 different people from 12 different experiences. The idea that the fact finders will now be one judge and two lay magistrates with the best will in the world limits their life experiences to be brought upon that particular problem. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is they are effectively professionals. I mean, they are not... It isn't trial by your peers anymore. It's trial by professionals. So that also needs to be thought about. There may be practical difficulties. I think there will be practical difficulties because of the difficulties of getting hold of enough JPs to be able to fulfill what is needed. Having said that, there are arguments in favour of it. One is that it is likely to be faster. One is that it will certainly be cheaper. And put those two things together and you may clear the backlog. I don't know how much thought has been given to other ways of clearing the backlog and other ways of keeping our courts flowing freely. We prosecute an awful lot. Yes. Oh my gosh, we can't keep our fingers off it.
There's a fine line between efficiency and accuracy, because if you don't have a jury system, you can get many more trials done, but then that might be serving less justice, I suppose. Yeah. But then also, if you're too complicated in the due proceedings and due procedure of courts, then that will also be eliminating justice because people will be waiting.
Yeah.
So how do we find like a balance between efficiency and efficacy?
Well, I'm not sure we've ever really understood what our justice system is about. Okay. I don't sure we've ever actually asked ourselves what we want from our criminal justice system. There seems to be a belief that what we want is to catch criminals and punish them. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's why we have criminal laws. I think it's a consequence of why we have criminal laws. But I think the real reason of having the laws is so that there is a clear delineation of what our society will not accept. And the purpose of doing that is in the hope that people won't commit crime. It isn't that we want to... of course, if crimes are committed, we want to catch the person who did it, and it would be quite nice to feel an appropriate penalty was imposed. But how much better if the crimes were not committed in the beginning? And we do nothing to concentrate on that at all. It's all about this offence has happened. How do we find the perpetrator? How do we put them before the court? And how do we exact
revenge?
That is the word. That is the word. The word punishment has sort of got lost or become confused with this idea of vengeance, revenge, and the net result of that is why we have backlogs of cases and why we have prisons stuffed to the gunnels and no way of actually locking up all the people that we are actually sending to prison for all the years we are sending them there. So I don't want to criticise any government. They're all the same. But having increased the sentences, and my gosh, they've been increased since when I came to the bar in 1975, exponentially longer than they were. Having increased the sentences, we now keep opening the doors and letting them out before they've been served. We let them out after 2/3, then after a half, now after 1/3. I mean, I could say, if I wanted to be unkind, for heaven's sake, guys, what is the point?
It's almost as if they're trying to scare people with punishment, as in that is actually what they're doing. So when they say 20, 35-year sentences and they only let them out after 10, the only reason for the 30-year sentence is to scare people. But does that actually work as a preventative measure?
So how did it happen in the beginning? You can almost date it to the day. There's a thing called the Criminal Justice Act 2003, which contains a thing called Schedule 21, which contains what you might call guidelines for sentencing murders. Now, before that, the only sentence available for murder was life imprisonment, as it is today. Before that, the judge had to impose a minimum tariff to be served before the prisoner could apply for parole. Didn't mean the prisoner would get parole, but had to be served before that prisoner could apply. Before that act, the average minimum tariff was 14 years and 10 months. Since then, the average minimum tariff is fractionally below 25 years. And that is because of Schedule 21, which says that if a weapon is taken to the scene of a crime and whatever purpose it's taken for, if it is then used in the murder, the starting point for the tariff is 25 years. You've mentioned 30 years a few times. If a gun is used, the starting point is 30 years. If there's more than one death, it's 30 years. If the crime is carried out for gain, particularly financial gain, but any gain really, that's a 30-year starting point. If there's unusual degradation, that can push it up. So the average sentences for murder became much longer. Now, you might say, well, so what? There aren't that many murders. But of course, it's had a trickle-down effect on everything else. If you increase the average sentence for murder, you have to increase it for attempt murder. And then you have to increase it for grievous bodily harm. And so the trickle-down effect goes on and on and on. So the reality is that sentences have got longer and longer and longer. Now, the question is why they ever did that in the beginning. And the answer is the question you asked, or one of you asked, which was about why Parliament thought this was a good idea. At the time, they were faced with a relatively new phenomenon. It wasn't that new, but it was becoming a very major problem, which was youngsters in gangs carrying knives. And the thought was that this would deter them, that the idea of a 25-year sentence to a 21-year-old, 22-year-old would deter him carrying a knife. You know, only Parliament could. I mean, what did they think? Did they think that these kids were going to say, you know what, 25 years is a long time. I think I'll stay home and watch Strictly tonight. It was never going to happen, and it hasn't happened. So we haven't stopped crime. We haven't deterred crime. QED, look at the figures. There's no less crime than there was. But everyone who now commits a murder is likely to be occupying a cell for very, very much longer than they were before. And because of principles of joint enterprise that only relatively recently have gone back to what they were before, more people will be involved in the risk of going to prison for 25 years for each of those murders. Whereas before, if 6 young men went out, one of them had a knife, and killed someone, the likelihood is he'd be convicted of murder, the others wouldn't, and whatever they were convicted of would have been far shorter sentence. Now, because of principles of joint enterprise, for a long time, they were all at risk of that 25-year sentence. More cells filled up.
Well, to my mind, the deterrent effect has never seemed to make much sense to me when you're dealing with irrational behaviour and crimes in the heat of the moment. And raising a sentence from 15 years to one of 25 for a 20-year-old is still a long sentence either way. So what you would expect the deterrent effect to be there. It feels like we're trying to ask you as a judge and ask a jury to solve a problem which, at the point it arrives with you, is essentially unsolvable. As you say, you're dealing with a dead or nearly dead body, and unlike sort of financial crime and perhaps some tort law, you can't find an obvious remedy. So which steps would you take in the community to sort of stop it at its source, to give yourself less work effectively if you were still a judge?
Preventative measures.
Yes, preventative measures.
Yeah, I mean, what I would really like to see is every judge in a criminal court out of work. That's what we'd all like to see, because there's no crime. Well, it's not going to happen. But it isn't a reason not to ask yourself how we stop crime happening in the beginning. And you're so right to say that I think what you're really saying is the word justice has a different meaning in a criminal court. In a civil court, Bob doesn't pay Bill a money he owes him, and the judge says, Bob, you pay Bill that money you owe him, and you pay costs, and that'll teach you. And that's justice. It evens things out. It puts things where they should be. You can't do that in a criminal court. You can't undead a dead body. You can't unviolate a rape child. There is no justice in that way. The best you can do is try to find an appropriate punishment, try to deter others, try, where possible, to involve some aspect of restitution. But the real issue, with which I totally agree, where you're coming from, is how do we stop it happening in the beginning? Yes. I think the problem is that we chop everything up. We look at the courts, and then we look at the prisons, and then we look at the police, and then we look at probation, and then we look at housing, and then we look at education. And each of those has a different department, a different ministry, a different funding source, and different attitudes. They're not separate like that. There is an arch that brings a child from an estate where the housing is so poor that the child hasn't got a bed. The mother, there is no father. The mother is out working, holding down 3 jobs. There's no supervision at home. The child is witnessing violence around him or her, drug use around him or her, doesn't apply him or herself at school, gets excluded, is wandering round a park, gets picked up by drugs dealers, because what else are you going to find in a park during the day when this child has nowhere else to go, gets into the criminal justice system, and I could just go on and on. But the fact is, by the time a 16-year-old walks into the dock at the Old Bailey, we have all failed.
I was listening to Edward Snowden. I'm not sure if you know who he is. And he grew up in a federal environment, and there's obviously the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, all these different agencies, and they actually compete against each other, just like the police, the armed forces, everything compete against each other. So they actually have incentives to not work together, and you think they should be a more cohesive unit?
I think that we should. We shouldn't be saying, oh my gosh, here's a 17-year-old who's committed the worst conceivable set of murders you can think of. We're going to send him to prison for life with a minimum term of 54 years before he can even apply for parole. And everybody goes, it's not long enough. It's not long enough. Or we get a man who is mentally ill, who goes out on the streets at night with a whole load of weapons and kills students, and we send him to a mental hospital because he is mentally ill. Everybody agrees he is, with no date when he will ever come out, unless he makes a completely unexpected recovery. And that isn't good enough. The public says, if he ever does get better, we should send him to prison for the rest of his life. So we have these concepts of what we want from justice, but we never stand back and say, look, this isn't about people who've done wrong or people who've been done wrong to. This is about our society. This is about us, how we want it to run. And there are other countries which have very, very different attitudes. I'm not saying they're right and we're wrong, or the other way round. But we look at them and say, Scandinavian countries, how on earth can you give a rapist 2 years? And they look at us and they say, how on earth can you give a rapist 22 years? And the bottom line is, they make their rapist go through very expensive, very, very hard programs of rehabilitation. And we look at that and we say, well, it's not good enough because, yes, all right, you've got a 16% reconviction rate and we've got a 60% reconviction rate, but where's the punishment? They say, what we want, it's bad enough it's happened. What we want is he never ever does it again. They look at us and say, what on earth is the point in locking someone up for 23 hours a day for 23 years and then letting them out no better than when they went inside, and back they come again. So it's a different attitude. But I do wonder if the time hasn't come when we shouldn't be saying, what do we have? Start again. What do we want from all of our systems? What is it we want? And I think what we want is a happy, peaceful, safe community, and that we should be applying everything across the scale to achieve that.
You're touching on quite sort of visceral, almost judicial intuitions, or a sense of justice that's kind of within us all, and they should be punished more, or they shouldn't be punished quite so much. Did you ever feel your own sort of subjectivity or your own emotional investment get the better of you, whether you were at the bar or perhaps delivering a sentence as a judge? Did you ever find yourself more invested than you knew you should have been?
This sounds awful, but I think that if that's how you are, you A, shouldn't be on the bench, and B, you probably wouldn't be, because you wouldn't get to the point at the bar where you were so senior and successful that you got an appointment on the bench. You are allowed more of that when you're a barrister, because you are fighting one side or the other, and it is your job, not quite so much for the prosecution, because you are expected to be much more balanced and more interested in making sure justice is done, whereas when you're defending, your interest should be, although you must never deceive the court, your interest should be everything you can do to represent your client. But when you're on the bench, the thing I loved about being a judge is it isn't like that. The thing about being on the bench is you don't fight a corner.
I'm going to ask you the question that I think every lawyer desperately avoids at a dinner party, and that is, how would you go about defending somebody who you are, I'm going to say who you know is guilty, but who you are virtually certain is guilty?
Why don't you ask me how I can prosecute someone I'm virtually certain is innocent?
Well, that was either side of the coin, and answer whichever you prefer.
Okay, let's take someone who the evidence is very strong against. So that when you start the trial, just looking at it, you think, oh my gosh.
Gonna lose this one.
I'm never going to win this. More to the point, he isn't going to win this one. So you might give quite robust advice, explaining about the discounts for a plea of guilty and so on. But if the defendant, man or woman or child, says, I didn't do it, then it isn't for the barrister to say, yes, you did, you're guilty. It's for the people that this country has invested with the duty and the power to do it, which is the jury. So all you're doing is allowing the jury to make the decision. I mean, every barrister who goes to dinner parties, somewhere between the pudding and the coffee, gets that question put to them. It happens every time.
I had to ask you for the benefit of our audience. I'm sure you've heard it. You've been asked 100 times before, but yes. So we have an increasing prison population. We have a crime rate which is growing exponentially. Are we getting more dangerous as a society, or are the police just getting better at doing their job?
What are the statistics that say crime is growing exponentially?
Oh,
maybe not exponentially.
Perhaps,
or even growing. We may have more prosecutions because we're catching more people and deciding to prosecute more people.
Yes.
that doesn't mean there are more offences. We may have more people in prison because we are putting more people inside on remand before they're tried, and because we're giving them more and longer sentences after they're tried. But neither of those things actually mean there is necessarily more crime. I don't know whether there is or there isn't. I think you'll find that the rate of murders has been what it is for a while. And I'd be surprised if armed robberies have gone up, because when I first came to the bar, armed robberies were 2 a penny. You very rarely see one now. Proper old-fashioned armed robbery, you don't see those anymore.
In the movies.
Well, it's too easy to get caught now, I suppose, yes.
Well, I wish that were the reason. I suspect the truth is there are other ways in which organised crime makes money now, and makes a lot more money. So organised crime that used to do armed robberies is essentially involved in drug stealing now.
Well, the reason I asked the question is when we were having a conversation with Chris Dorr, he was describing how most of the crime that takes place globally now is
Ad fraud.
Advertising fraud and various types of crime via the internet.
Yeah.
So
globally, that is. I mean,
yes.
There are certain if you're going to be looking at that sort of crime, then absolutely, frauds of that nature are so much easier now to carry out by people who are overseas, who are at very little risk of being caught. And yes, that sort of crime has increased exponentially, and they're not really troubling our courts very much because we never catch them. But the sort of stuff that is coming into our courts, murders, rapes, I mean, what there is more of are the very serious and rare cases. So you can go generations without someone like facing charges like Lucy Letby did. Yes. You can go generations without someone like Axel Rudakubana, or someone like Valdo Calocane. Yes. So, those sorts of crimes you could say are more common, and there are the obvious reasons for them. So there is more crime linked to those who are seriously mentally ill, because we're not looking after them. We used to have hospitals, we used to care for them, we used to, lock them up, but we weren't, if someone had, Valdo Calocane was documented by a doctor as someone that he thought could end up killing people, and they opened the door on him. And they let him out and they stopped watching over him, and they stopped worrying about him, because they said, well, he won't take his medication, there's nothing more we can do. Now, if you take that attitude, you really and you take it to enough people who are sick enough, it's not surprising that a proportion of them go out and commit crimes of great violence. And then if you have someone like Axel Rudakubana, where we've got this high level of access, again, online, to information, and if I use the word brainwashing, I'm not using it in its proper term.
I understand it being used colloquially.
But you know what I mean. Then you can't be that surprised if every now and again it throws up someone like him. So for those very extreme cases, yes, you're right, and I think there are perfectly obvious reasons when you stand back and look at it. But as to the run-of-the-mill cases, you may be right. There may be an awful lot more. There probably is an awful lot more shoplifting now, but But there are very obvious reasons for that. You cut back enough on social support, and you don't send people to prison for shoplifting because no one bothers even to prosecute, then you are going to get more shoplifting. So I think there are perfectly logical reasons for the sorts of crimes at both ends of the scale where there is more. I'm just not convinced that for the huge body in the middle, there are that many more. But there certainly are more trials, and there certainly are more people going to prison.
Just going back to like truly evil people that we were talking about, you once said, and I can't remember where, you once said that you can count the number of truly evil people that you've met on your hand, or on your hands rather, over the course of your career. So what makes those truly evil people? Are they just born that way, or is it society moulding them?
Okay. An awful lot of people who come into court have done truly evil things. And then you look at how they've come to do them, and they have to be punished for the evil that they've done, but you can't actually say they are evil people. There are people who arguably are what Hollywood would have called in the old days a bad seed. Something that from the beginning was twisted. You're using the word evil. I've probably used the word evil too in the past. A psychiatrist wouldn't. A psychiatrist would say, there's something wrong with the brain. This brain isn't functioning in the way a human brain should function. A bit of it is not picking up on things. But I saw an awful lot of young people, really children, 16, 17 years old. They are children. If they were ours, we'd call them children. In the dock for murder, who, as you listened to them and looked at them, seemed not to understand the gravity of what they'd done, not to be able to empathize with what it was to take away someone's child, to take away someone's life. A real lack of empathy. Now, technically, that can be regarded as a sign of a very serious mental illness. Yeah, a psychopath. Exactly that. But these kids weren't all psychopaths. One of the things many of them had in common was they had been excluded from school. And one of the things they had in common, quite often, was they had very limited powers of literacy. Now, I don't know if you know this, 50% of our prison population is functionally illiterate. 47% has a reading age at level 1 or less. That's what you would hope for from a 5-year-old. You try functioning in this society if you can't read, if you can't use a smartphone, if you can't use a computer, if you can't read the letter that says we're going to cut off your electricity, but if you've got a real problem, let us know. But you can't read the letter. But I think it goes deeper than that. If you ask yourselves how we learned to understand how other people feel, one of the great sources of that is from the time we were tiny, we read stories where other people experience the desert island, the fear of being kidnapped, whatever it is, whatever the story is. We are actually learning what it is to be inside somebody else's mind. It isn't the same to watch a film or play a video game. Kids that can't read never get exposed to that. And I think that has an effect.
Well, and I think there's also a pretty dangerous effect in the prison population, which keeps the brain of a prisoner in the prison. There's no story world to escape to. There's nowhere outside of your cell walls. So if you're illiterate, you're both physically and mentally stuck there.
Or, to put it another way,
Yes.
if you were locked up, the very first thing you would ask for, before you asked for anything else, is books.
Yes.
And then the cell walls melt away.
Yes.
And time passes. If you can't read, you are trapped. You are trapped in where you are. And reading is, to my mind, it is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to another human being.
With being in prison as well, if you can't read, then you're going to have to seek entertainment somewhere. So that would be talking to other people in prison. And Christor has this idea of prison being the university of crime. If you put someone in a position that has committed a crime and has been labelled as a criminal, and then you put them in an environment where there are people with more severe crimes, then they're going to learn how to commit more severe crimes.
Well, that's what happens. That's why prison doesn't work. I mean, I've forgotten who it was. Was it Michael Howard? Somebody said prison works. Do you know, prison simply so does not work. The only way in which it works is it keeps the outside population safe as long as that prisoner is locked up. The instant you open the door, out he comes, even if it's 25 years later. You're letting out someone who, if they went into prison as a 21-year-old and they come out in their 50s, has never lived a normal adult life with women and children around him, who has never taken responsibility for organising his own day, never mind his own life. If we think they're going to slip seamlessly back into society, we are just kidding ourselves.
Well, can you appeal to one of the governments which is all the same, in that we suffer that people don't want to pay especially large amounts of tax, and the tax that we do pay, the justice system is vying with poorly people in the NHS, and it's vying for children in the education system. So it's always hard with that context to make a compelling case for more funding in the justice system, which everyone also sort of at the same time acknowledges that it needs. So where do you stand on that?
Well, I mean, one has to be realistic. If I had a child who needed a dialysis machine and there wasn't one, I'd be the first to say, why isn't there more money in the NHS? The thing is, in the past, centuries ago, people paid tithes to the areas to the church in the area where they lived, for the subsistence of the church, which helped look after people, and the care of people within their little community. We regard the paying of tax as appalling, and we all try terribly hard, well, not everyone. Many people try very hard to reduce their tax bills as much as they possibly can and not to pay tax, because it's in their self-interest not to pay tax. They'd like to have more money left in their bank account. Everyone is interested in their own good. And it's one aspect of what I was saying when I think we've maybe just got the whole picture wrong. The whole picture. If you stop looking at the individual things and you say, look, we're all on this ship together. If it goes down, we all go down together. If it sails smoothly along, we all sail smoothly along. I mean, I know it sounds like a dream, but if we don't at least dream, we haven't got a hope of making things better.
So do you think tax is a branding problem? Because I know in Northern European countries, they kind of like paying tax.
Yeah.
They'll go out their way to do it.
And the Scandinavian countries are strong believers in making their society work. There are societies who believe in that, who believe that contributing to a society is really important. We happen, I think, quite often not to. Now, there are an awful lot of people who do give of their time and they volunteer for things, and I'm that is wonderful. there are a lot of very good, kind people in our country. But there is a tendency to... So our laws and the way our justice system works really emanates from the government that we have in power. And we tend to vote for the things that benefit us. People don't cast... This has nothing to do with the law. I don't know why I'm talking about it, but it's common sense. People are not voting because they think the vote is going to help certain sections of society. Some people do, but not many. People, by and large, exercise their vote in a way they have a perfect right to, which is what gives them most, what is in their own self-interest. And that I don't criticise that. That's a perfectly valid point of view. But you can't have everything. If you don't put into society, there's nothing there to spread around.
Yes.
But that selfishness is, I think, one of the reasons why Western countries have been so successful. Like if you look at the US, the UK, they're very entrepreneurial because they want what they want, and they'll go and get it. Whereas it's funny because countries that typically tend to be happier tend to be poorer,
or at least more community-minded.
Yes.
So more community-minded, happier. What does it matter if they're poorer? If they are leading better quality lives, and what makes better quality than happiness? I mean, this has nothing to do with the law, but it's an interesting question. But what it is to do with is what I started to say at the very beginning. I'm not sure we have really worked out what we want.
Yes. That's a place which I didn't expect to get to today, but that's very interesting in that what makes us happy actually is that community. I mean, have you ever seen the Blue Zones research of the places the places in the world where they live extraordinarily long periods of time?
Yeah.
And actually, at face value, there's Okinawa in Japan, and there's a sort of Christian community in the US, and vastly different lives and lifestyles. But it's that sense of community which sort of brings everyone together. So that's a very interesting point to reach, and
and it's security. It's people are not living in fear.
Yes.
And that's where much of our community is at the moment. And that's why I say I don't think we've worked out what we really want from our systems.
In fear of retribution, in fear of the law against them as well.
Yes. I'd like to ask you one final question, and that is, as light-hearted as you'd like to make it, you can change the law and fix the world, or you can solve a minor inconvenience for you. Here is a magic wand. Do with that magic wand however you please. You can change one thing about the world around you. What would you change?
Oh, I would look at education, and I would concentrate on literacy. I really, really believe that we could make our world a better place by something as simple as proper education.
Well, write another book for us, please, and we will gladly read it. Wendy Joseph, Unlawful Killings and Rough Justice are both absolutely superb. Thank you for writing them, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you both
very
much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.